Right now, somewhere outside the United States, someone is unboxing a brand new HP or Asus laptop with a Chinese-made chip sitting inside it. And neither the buyer, nor HP, nor Asus will be the first to know if that chip has a flaw. China will. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's written into Chinese law. Three of the world's biggest laptop makers, HP, Asus, and Acer, have started building memory chips from a Chinese company called CXMT into real shipping notebooks. And buried in the fine print of how China regulates its own tech companies is a rule that flips the entire security relationship between a manufacturer and its customer upside down. Today we're breaking down how a company almost nobody had heard of a year ago ended up inside some of the biggest laptop brands on Earth, and why the mechanism behind it should genuinely worry you, even if the chip itself never does anything wrong. Before we get into it, these deep dives take a lot of digging through regulatory filings, earnings reports, and industry sourcing that most channels don't bother with. If that's the kind of research you want more of, the like button and the subscribe bell are how this channel keeps making them. Now, here's where it gets genuinely strange. For close to 2 decades, the rule governing laptop memory was simple. If you were HP, Dell, Asus, Lenovo, or Acer, your DRAM, the memory chips that let your computer actually run programs, came from one of 3 companies: Samsung, SK hynix, Micron. Between them, those 3 firms controlled somewhere north of 90% of the entire world's memory chip output. That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't really a choice for the laptop makers either. DRAM manufacturing is one of the hardest things humans have figured out how to mass produce. You're printing billions of microscopic capacitors onto a wafer, and if even a tiny fraction of them fail, the whole chip is garbage. Only a handful of companies on the planet had ever cracked that process at scale, and all of them happened to be South Korean or American. For years, that gave PC makers something close to certainty. Order the memory, get the memory, ship the laptop. Prices moved with the market, sure. Memory has always been a boom and bust business, but the supply chain itself was never really in question. Nobody was losing sleep over who made the chip inside their machine, because there were only ever 3 real answers, and all 3 had been independently audited, stress-tested, and picked apart by security researchers for the better part of 20 years. That stability is exactly what's cracking right now. Here's the part that doesn't make it into most of the coverage. This isn't a story about China getting cheaper. It's a story about the West running out. Starting in 2025, artificial intelligence changed what memory chips are actually for. Training and running large AI models doesn't just need regular memory. It needs an entirely different category called high bandwidth memory, which stacks memory chips vertically and pushes data at roughly 20 times the speed of the DRAM in a normal laptop. And the only companies who know how to make that kind of memory at scale are, again, Samsung, SK hynix, and Micron. So, those 3 companies did the economically rational thing. They started redirecting factory capacity, the same factories that used to pump out ordinary laptop memory, toward high bandwidth memory for AI data centers, because that's where the money is. Every wafer diverted to an NVIDIA AI chip is a wafer that isn't going into your next laptop. Think of it like a bakery that suddenly discovers it can make 10 times more money selling wedding cakes than dinner rolls. It doesn't stop making bread entirely, it just makes a lot less of it, and what's left gets more expensive. That's exactly what happened to laptop memory. Contract prices for ordinary DRAM jumped by more than 50% in a matter of months in early 2026. Analysts started calling it the RAM-pocalypse. Industry forecasters slashed their PC shipment estimates by double digits for the year and warned things would get worse, not better, heading into 2027. And this is the part that's easy to miss if you're not watching the AI side of the industry closely. This isn't a temporary blip while factories catch up. Building a new memory fab takes years and costs tens of billions of dollars. And right now, every incentive in the industry points toward building more AI-grade capacity, not more ordinary laptop capacity. Samsung, SK hynix, and Micron aren't behaving irrationally. They're following the money, and the money is overwhelmingly in AI infrastructure. Forecasters don't expect ordinary DRAM pricing to return to 2025 levels before 2028 at the earliest. That's not a supply hiccup. That's a multi-year restructuring of who gets memory and who doesn't. Smartphone makers felt it too. Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo all cut their shipment forecasts multiple times through the year for the exact same reason. This wasn't a laptop-specific problem. It was every device on Earth that needs ordinary memory, competing against a data center industry that suddenly needed the same factories for something else entirely. So picture yourself as HP's supply chain team. Your 3 suppliers are suddenly rationing you. Prices are climbing every quarter. Your competitors are facing the exact same squeeze. What do you do when the people who've always sold you the part you need simply don't have enough of it to go around? You start looking for a 4th supplier, and there was exactly one company in the world positioned to become that 4th option. That company is CXMT, Changshin Memory Technologies, and its rise is the actual engine of this whole story. CXMT was founded in Hefei, China in 2016 with a starting investment equivalent to about $1.5 million. For most of its life, it was a rounding error in the global memory business, a company Western analysts barely tracked, building chips almost nobody outside China bought. As of the most recent industry data, CXMT holds roughly 7.67% of the global DRAM market. That makes it the 4th largest memory maker on the planet, and by far the largest one that isn't Korean or American. And here's the number that should make you sit up. In late July 2026, CXMT went public on Shanghai's Star Market, and its shares surged 466% on debut. It raised the equivalent of over $8.5 billion, the single largest IPO anywhere in Asia in 2026. Its first half profit for the year is estimated at somewhere between $7.5 and $8.5 billion, an increase of more than 2,200% compared to the year before. 2,200%. That's not a company riding a trend. That's a company that happened to be standing in exactly the right spot when the floor gave out from under its competitors. Here's how CXMT actually got good enough to be a real option, because this part matters for understanding both what it can and can't do. Modern memory chips are normally patterned using extreme ultraviolet lithography, EUV. Machines so precise they're essentially printing circuits using light with a wavelength smaller than most viruses. There's exactly one company on Earth that makes EUV machines, a Dutch firm called ASML, and Dutch export law has never allowed a single one of those machines to be shipped to China. Full stop. No workaround, no license, no exception. So CXMT had to get clever with older tools. Instead of EUV, it uses deep ultraviolet DUV machines, which use a longer, less precise wavelength of light. To compensate, CXMT runs each circuit layer through the lithography process multiple times, a technique called multi-patterning, essentially tracing over the same line several times with a slightly blunter pencil until the shape is precise enough. It works. But every extra pass adds cost, adds tiny alignment errors, and limits how small and dense the final chip can get. It's the difference between drawing a perfect circle in one confident stroke versus building the same circle out of 4 overlapping arcs. You can get there, but it costs you time, and the seams show up somewhere eventually. That's how a company blocked from the world's best chip-making tools still managed to produce memory good enough to go into a real HP laptop. Not by matching the leader's process, by working around it. So HP, Asus, and Acer did what any supply chain team facing a shortage would do. They started qualifying CXMT's chips. Qualification is the unglamorous but critical process where a manufacturer tests a new component in real hardware under real workloads to make sure it doesn't quietly break something 6 months down the line. All 3 companies reportedly completed that process around the middle of 2026. And have since begun putting small quantities of CXMT memory into a limited number of notebook models sold outside the United States in markets across Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Here's the twist most coverage misses. This was never about saving money. Sources close to the deal say CXMT's chips are not cheaper than Samsung's, they're priced at parity. This isn't a bargain hunting story, it's a we need it to exist at all story. And independent lab testing backs up that CXMT's regular DDR5 memory performs essentially the same as Samsung's or SK Hynix's equivalent chips in real-world use. For an everyday laptop, the performance gap has basically closed. But performance was never the part worth worrying about. The part worth worrying about is a regulation most people have never heard of. Under Chinese law, specifically the regulations on the management of security vulnerabilities in network products, any company operating in China that discovers a security flaw in a piece of hardware has 48 hours to report it to the Chinese government before telling anyone else, foreign or domestic. Not 48 hours to fix it. 48 hours to tell Beijing it exists, before HP knows, before Asus knows, before the person who bought the laptop knows. Picture a smoke detector that's wired to call the fire department the instant it senses smoke, except it's programmed to call a government office in Beijing first, and only after that call goes through does it get around to calling your landlord. The house is the same house. The smoke is the same smoke. But who finds out first and what they do with that information before anyone else gets a warning is now completely out of your hands. That's not a hidden backdoor. Nobody has found one, and to be fair to CXMT, memory chips are largely passive components. They store data. They don't run code or dial out to the internet on their own, which genuinely limits what kind of mischief a compromised chip could do, even in a worst-case scenario. This regulation isn't about the chip doing something sinister. It's about who gets to know first when something goes wrong, and that asymmetry has been sitting in Chinese law, in force, since 2021. It just never applied to a laptop sitting on your desk in Berlin or Sao Paulo until this year. And it doesn't stop at that one regulation. China's national intelligence law requires every organization operating under Chinese jurisdiction, CXMT included, to cooperate with state intelligence work if asked. Its counter-espionage law requires companies to hand over requested information truthfully, with no right of refusal. None of that is optional, none of it can be waived by a contract, and none of it changes just because CXMT is now a publicly listed company with international customers. It's baked into operating on Chinese soil, the same way a company operating in the US has to comply with a US subpoena. The difference is what compliance actually requires and how much visibility outsiders get into when it happens. To be precise about where the actual exposure sits, that legal framework mostly touches CXMT's own corporate systems and manufacturing data, not the memory chip itself once it's sealed inside your laptop and sitting on your desk. The chip doesn't get more dangerous because of the national intelligence law, but the disclosure rule does apply directly to any flaw discovered in that exact chip, wherever it ends up in the world. Now, before this turns into pure alarm bell territory, let's flag exactly what is not proven here, because the honest version of this story is more interesting than the scary version. No confirmed backdoor has ever been found in a CXMT chip. Not one. Security researchers have looked, and DRAM's basic architecture, passive, no independent code execution, no ability to dial out on its own, makes hiding a functioning spy mechanism inside one considerably harder than in, say, a Wi-Fi chip or a cellular modem. The scarier version of this story that some headlines lean into, that China is planting spy chips in your laptop, isn't what the evidence supports right now. What is real and documented is narrower but still significant. Nobody has independently stress-tested CXMT's specific implementation of the safety mechanisms that protect against a known class of memory attacks called rowhammer, the way researchers have spent a decade doing for Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron chips. That's not proof of a weakness. It's an absence of the years of scrutiny that give you confidence there. Isn't one. And CXMT is nowhere close to catching up on the metric that actually matters most for the AI era. While it's competitive on ordinary laptop memory, it's still roughly 3 years behind Samsung and SK Hynix on high bandwidth memory, the AI-grade stuff, largely because Dutch export rules block the advanced lithography machines China would need to close that gap the easy way. CXMT is compensating with more complex, more expensive workarounds, and its manufacturing costs still run over 30% higher than its rivals once the current shortage-driven pricing settles back down. This is a company winning a moment, not a company that has caught the leaders. One more wrinkle. Apple is testing CXMT memory too, and it's created enough political heat that a bipartisan group of senators gave Tim Cook a deadline, August 21, 2026, to publicly promise CXMT chips will never appear in any Apple device, anywhere, even in China. HP, Asus, and Acer are headquartered outside the US, so that Senate pressure doesn't reach them directly. Which means the exact same component drawing congressional letters for Apple is quietly shipping, unremarked upon, inside laptops from 3 other major brands. Zoom out, and this stops being a story about one chip and starts being a story about how fragile the assumption of trusted supplier really was all along. For 20 years, Western consumers never had to think about who made the memory inside their machine, because the answer was always one of three companies operating under legal systems with predictable, transparent disclosure norms. That assumption held right up until an AI boom on one side of the world created a shortage that made a fourth option, operating under a completely different legal system, commercially necessary on the other side. The US government has responded, but slowly and unevenly. The Department of Defense has already banned direct government contracts with CXMT. A broader ban covering all federal agencies doesn't kick in until December 2027. Legislation that would cut CXMT off from the manufacturing tools it needs to keep growing has passed a House committee but hasn't become law. And outside the United States entirely, across Taiwan, the EU, Southeast Asia, Latin America, there is currently no legal barrier at all stopping HP, Asus, or Acer from using as much CXMT memory as the market will bear. Which means the real story isn't really about CXMT specifically. It's about what happens when a critical piece of global tech infrastructure quietly diversifies away from a small, trusted club of suppliers, under pressure nobody chose, faster than the regulations meant to keep pace with that shift. And this isn't a one-country story either. HP is headquartered in the US. Asus and Acer are both headquartered in Taiwan, an island whose entire security relationship with mainland China is, to put it mildly, complicated. A Taiwanese company choosing to source memory from a mainland Chinese supplier, even under supply pressure, is a decision loaded with a political weight that a purely commercial memory shortage doesn't fully explain. Nobody at Asus or Acer has said much publicly about that tension, which is itself worth noticing. Meanwhile, CXMT isn't standing still waiting to be regulated. It's already talking about a second 12-inch wafer fab in Beijing, on top of expanding its existing production. Every quarter it operates inside this shortage, it gets a little more capital, a little more manufacturing experience, and a little more leverage the next time a Western PC maker needs a fourth supplier in a hurry. The shortage that let CXMT in the door might end. The market position it built while the door was open won't disappear when it does. So here's the open question worth sitting with. Is this the start of memory chips becoming just another commodity, bought from wherever supply exists, the way we already buy from 4 different countries for a dozen other components? Or is memory different because of what that 48-hour disclosure rule means the moment something actually goes wrong? So that's the real story. Not a hidden spy chip, but a legal structure that quietly changes who finds out first when something breaks, sitting inside laptops that are shipping right now, largely without anyone outside the industry noticing. If you want more deep dives like this one, breaking down the tech stories that don't get the plain language explanation they deserve, hit subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Here's the question I'll leave you with. If the chip itself never does anything wrong, does the disclosure rule alone make it a real security risk? Or is that just a legal technicality dressed up as a scandal? Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you want to go deeper on how China's chip industry closed the performance gap on ordinary memory almost overnight, that's a video we've got queued up next.